I'm George Galloway, and I present Kalima Horra on Al-Mayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. Kalima Horra means free word. That's what I speak. So Kalima Horra is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Al-Mayadeen television. Welcome to Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Al-Mayadeen television, coming to you from London, but discussing the entire Middle East, not now, but in 5 years' time. Because the supposition of this program is that the United States will have withdrawn or be driven out of the Middle East in 5 years' time. And so the question is, what will the Middle East be like in 5 years' time? Now, some of you may think the supposition is unrealistic. In that case, you didn't see the demonstration of millions of people in Iraq in the last days, weeks. You did not see the extent to which the people are now rising up against US occupation, the US presence in the Middle East. In my opinion, the US withdrawal from the Middle East will take place much more rapidly than 5 years. Not from everywhere, of course, but in a decisive and region-changing way. A man of my age and class and background rarely weeps, at least in front of other people. But I did weep when I saw 7-year-old little Kais, the Palestinian boy kidnapped by Israeli settlers and thrown in a well and fished out dead, having frozen to death. And I mention that because one thing that will not change in 5 years is the occupation of Palestine and the US underwriting of that occupation. That will take much longer than 5 years. But the extent to which, in public opinion in the world, the scales have decisively shifted in the Israel-Palestine conflict is marked and getting more strong. When I began to work in that field in 1975, you could have fitted all the supporters of the Palestinian people into this studio and had room for a couple of elephants at the back. Now you couldn't fit them into Hyde Park, and the genuine supporters, those who are with Israel out of love, could be fitted in this studio. And that is represented all over the world. Of course, not at a state level. They can still command governments at their whim, but that will eventually change. And the movement for boycott, divestment, and sanctions in the Western world against Israel can only grow, no matter how often they pass laws to try and outlaw it. That will not change in 5 years. But within 5 years, there will be no single American soldier present on the soil of the Syrian Arab Republic. Within 5 years, within 5 weeks, 5 months, 1 year, there will be no American soldier on the soil of Iraq. There is no American soldier in Yemen. There are mercenaries, but they too will be driven out in that period. There are no American soldiers in Libya, though the United States did an enormous amount to destroy Libya and bring it to its current sorry pass. There will be definitely no American soldiers ever in the Islamic Republic of Iran. The next 5 years will bring a decisive change. Of course, there will still be Gulf satrapies with American bases on their soil. There will still be American puppet regimes in the region whose waters and ports can be used by the US Navy. But there will be fewer and fewer. And this will be painted as a strategic shift by the United States. Withdrawal from the region because they no longer have any requirement for the oil and gas of the Middle East, a pivot to Asia, a pivot to other challenges to United States hegemony. What will the Arabs then do with the American free zone that will be the result? That, of course, is an open question. It's my opinion, though, that the shift that will occur in the next 5 years will shape the Middle East for the better. The axis of resistance to Israel, to American domination, will become stronger, and the puppets of the American hegemony weaker. And that will open new possibilities. Of course, there will be other attempts to divide and rule the Arabs, as there always have been, from the British through the Americans, involving Israel. People will try to turn sect against sect, religion against religion, even country against country in the Arab Maghreb, a repeated pattern. But I believe, call me an optimist, that those forces will begin to lose strength over the next 5 years and not gain it. The era of Arab unity and the idea of the Arabs from Marrakesh to Bahrain as one people with one language and one God will be stronger at the end of this 5-year period we're talking about, and not weaker. I'm joined, as always, by a group of distinguished experts and one or two enthusiastic amateurs like myself. Let's get on with the debate. Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, an expert in this area as well as others, why don't you kick off the debate?
Thank you, George. My name is Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, and I'm the editor of Politics First magazine, which is the official publication of the UK Houses of Parliament. Now, the savage murder by the Americans of Qasem Soleimani has certainly altered the dynamics of the Middle East, but I would contend in the short term, not in the long term, because the Americans are and will remain the outside dominant force in the Middle East. Indeed, there is no evidence, certainly no tangible evidence, to suggest that the Americans are going to lose their prime, overwhelming, dominant position in the Middle East. The Americans don't just control the oil and the oil pipelines in the Middle East. They don't just control the arms market. They don't just control the commodities market. They control a lot more than that. And I think Iraq is a very good example, is a very good case study of that. Now, we know that the Americans have been in Iraq for nearly 17 years. And during those 17 years, the Americans have not been idle. Yes, they've taken over the oil infrastructure in that country, but they've done a lot more than that. They have penetrated the political institutions in Iraq. They have penetrated the Iraqi military. They have penetrated the Iraqi intelligence community. And I would submit to you, George, all the more important is the Americans have penetrated the Iraqi civil service. If you control the civil service effectively, you control the country concerned. And I would draw a parallel to what has happened to Serbia in the last 20 years. Serbia today is a client state. I wouldn't describe Iraq as a client state of America, not yet. But Serbia is a client state today, whereas we know that in the 1990s, the Serbs were resisting Western global dominance. But one of the ways, one of the mechanisms in which the Americans control Serbia is they control the civil service. And that is how the Americans have such a powerful position in Iraq. We saw the magnificent demonstrations recently of Iraqis in Baghdad calling for the Americans to be expelled from Iraq, and I would relish the day for that to come. But I believe it's a lot more complicated than that, because even, let's just say, George, the American military were to withdraw from Iraq, well, that doesn't mean the Americans have gone from Iraq because, as I said, they control the political institutions, they control the civil service, the military, the intelligence. The Americans, during 17 years of illegal occupation of Iraq, have been remarkably busy and active. The Americans, in some ways, are not very good at strategic planning, but sometimes they are, and they know that if they are to control a country, if they are to maintain their foothold in that country, they have to penetrate the civil service. Now, that said, there is reason to be optimistic because ever since Russia legally intervened in Syria to defeat ISIS and Al-Qaeda, we have seen the emergence of what I call an unofficial alliance in the Middle East, an unofficial alliance involving Russia, Syria, Iran, and also Hezbollah. And that is good for trying to do something about increasing peace and stability in the Middle East, and also countering another unofficial alliance in the Middle East, which of course is comprised of America, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. So in conclusion, the Americans are the dominant force in the Middle East. I don't think that's going to change any day soon, but they don't have the field to themselves anymore like they did, say, 20 years ago or 30 years ago. It is absolutely imperative, in my opinion, that this unofficial alliance between Moscow, Damascus, and Tehran is formalized, because then that would do much to guaranteeing the security and safety of Iran and also of Syria and also of Hezbollah, and it would do something to limiting American dominance of the Middle East.
Well, that's a challenging hypothesis. I profoundly disagree with it. You say that the American hegemony in the region will not end any time soon. Their dominance will not end anytime soon. I think it ended yesterday or the day before yesterday. Sometimes the enemy struggles mightily to lift a huge stone only to drop it on its own feet. And I believe that's what has happened. The United States failed to overthrow the government in Damascus. They failed to use, in their bid to use, ISIS and Al-Qaeda to undermine everything in the Levant. They have failed in Lebanon. They failed in Syria. They have failed in Libya, where the National Army will soon be in control of the country. They have failed in Yemen, where they sought to establish Gulf Arab hegemony in the Yemen. They have failed in Afghanistan. They have failed against Iran. And so actually they have demonstrated not their strength, but their weakness. I give you this example. I saw, you did, Donald Trump come to the podium 24 hours after the Iranian response to the murder of Soleimani. And I saw him say that the Iranians have stood down and that no American service personnel were harmed in the Iranian response to the murder of Soleimani. But both of these things were demonstrable falsehoods. It is now accepted, announced by the Pentagon, that there were dozens, perhaps scores, of American casualties in the Iranian retaliation on the US airbase. And it was not Iran that stood down, but Donald Trump who stood down. He promised that if any American base was attacked, then his $2 trillion worth of shiny weapons would be heading, without hesitation, he said, for Iran. Well, a base was attacked, and a significant number of US casualties incurred, but there was no attack on Iran. And the reason is that Donald Trump knew that any attack on Iran would be met with another Iranian response, and soon we'd be in full-scale war. And the satrapies to which I referred earlier would be destroyed. And the Iranians named them. For I don't want to hurt their feelings, but everyone watching this knows which of these Arab satrapies would have been in flames and destroyed. So I think the balance of power has shifted. Now, you're right. Just because the American soldiers withdraw doesn't mean the Americans have gone, but the Americans are not good at soft power. They're very good at hard power, especially from the sky. But when there are no more American soldiers in Iraq, trust me, the civil servants they suborned, the journalists they've bought, the television stations they control and own will be of little use to them, because the mass power of the Iraqi people will drive them out, and much, much quicker than 5 years, because the millions on the streets of Baghdad, if they're not listened to, then it will be a different kind of Iraqi pressure that will be brought to bear. Think Lebanon in 1982. The Americans will leave either peacefully now or leave in boxes in the weeks, months, and years to come. So here's two different analyses. Carol Gould, you're an American, forgive me saying so, a good American. Tell us what you think about the shape of the Middle East in 5 years' time.
Okay, I think we're going to get possibly a third perspective. I'd like to start with November 4th, 1995, when Yitzhak Rabin, the Israeli prime minister, was shot in Tel Aviv. Within a few minutes, Boris Yeltsin, who was in hospital, some people will say he was having an alcoholic episode. We will reserve judgment on that. But he said, with this shot heard round the world, the region will be bathed in rivers of blood. That's 25 years ago, almost. Everyone in the world said, oh, God, he's drunk. Oh, he's losing his mind. Ignore him. Actually, a lot of what he said ensued. It was true. Whatever we may think of the Rabin, Oslo, Arafat, King Hussein negotiations, it was better than what we have now, certainly. It's 25 years ago. Now let's fast forward to 2007, and I'd like to read you something which I hope will bring a few laughs. General Wesley Clark, who at that time was the head of NATO and a very important general in the Bush administration, although regarded as something of a liberal, but he said, and I quote, "We're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years. Iraq, we're going to take out. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran." Well, it didn't happen. But now, and of course, Obama came in 2008. What I felt was hopeful during the Obama administration was the Iran nuclear deal and the reduction in sanctions. Now, I know you've talked a lot just now, and you've talked about Iraq, but to me, the pivotal event in the next few months will be the American election. Lest we forget that Trump said, it must have been about 10 days ago, after the Supreme Leader gave a speech saying, "America, watch out." And Trump replied with, "Supreme Leader, watch out." Now, to me, that was one of the most frightening statements made by an American president ever. He then said, about 3 days later, Trump, might be an idea to start all over again with negotiations with Iran on a nuclear deal, which I found interesting. If he goes that way and it comes out with a good result, which I doubt, that's a good thing. But if we get a new president in November, we have to watch what Trump does between November and January, because he'll still be in office. And there is a theory that he might unleash such violence and imbalance and disturbance in that part of the world that we could have what could be another world war. I see the future of the Middle East in 5 years in a very pessimistic way. I'm sorry. Lebanon has terrible economic problems. So does Jordan. Jordan has been, I wouldn't say overwhelmed, but there have been so many Syrian refugees coming into Jordan. The economies of Jordan, Lebanon, and of course, without doubt, the Palestinian territories right now are a very serious problem. I cannot see Syria carrying on with the conflict and with the destruction. It would be good to see countries like Algeria and even Sudan, well, not really the Middle East, taking a lead in solving some of the problems. And in this respect, the absence of the US, the departure of the US is important. Now let's get to Israel. Netanyahu, in the past 2 or 3 years, has begun to quote the American expression, reach out to people like Orban in Hungary. He must be thrilled that Boris Johnson is now in place in the UK, and Netanyahu is hoping, and Netanyahu seems to have been there forever, he's establishing a kind of dictatorship. I think he's going to be, certainly in 5 years, he will still be there. An alliance with Trump, and he's probably praying, as is Saudi Arabia, that Trump will be reelected in November, and I have a feeling he will be. The American electorate couldn't care less whether he's been impeached by Congress. And another point I want to make, people seem to think that the Jewish vote in the US is the one that supports people like Trump. It isn't. It's the evangelical Christians, 70 million. They fill stadia when Netanyahu goes over to talk there, to give speeches. That is where the big money and the big support base comes for Trump. Netanyahu knows that. Saudi Arabia is keeping an eye on what's going on with the election. And I don't see Trump losing in November. Sadly, there don't seem to be any Democratic candidates who could come to the fore. If there was, and he or she won, we might see a change in the attitude towards Iran.
Well, Carol, what about the only Jewish presidential candidate ever to have a chance? Bernie Sanders is now ahead of the Democratic pack. Mm-hmm. I think, I predicted it some months ago, that Sanders will be the Democrat nominee. Mm-hmm. And if he is, he can beat Trump.
Well, he could have beaten Trump in 2016, but those of us who were watching it day by day, 24/7, know that he got he won 23 states and nearly 2,000 delegates. That is nearly half of the United States in the primaries. He won states in the primaries that Hillary Clinton lost in the general election. But his supporters, the whole structure of the Democratic National Committee, tried to trounce everything, every aspiration that the Sanders delegates wanted at the convention, because they should have had some of the superdelegates go his way. And I do believe, as you do, I absolutely believe he could have beaten Trump.
Carol Gould, thank you for that. 3 very different perspectives to kick off the debate about the Middle East 5 years from now. We'll be right back. You're watching Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, for Al Mayadeen Television, coming from London, but discussing the Middle East. Where will it be? What will it be? What will it look like in 5 years' time? We took the Kalima Horra camera onto the streets of London to see what the people thought. Take a look.
As the US is asked to withdraw, do you think the Middle East would be better or worse off?
I think it will be in a better position, yes.
I think it would be much better off without the Americans.
Well, I think the conflict in the Middle East has been going on for so long now, and we've seen the dynamics that are at play. It seems as though when Iran steps out of line slightly with what the US want them to do, there's a huge overreaction. So I think the US drawing from the Middle East would bring about a more peaceful resolution.
If the U.S. leaves the Middle East alone, I feel like there's a lot of room for progress, especially in lower economically developed countries such as Lebanon, Syria.
I think the Middle East will be better off because they will have the chance to develop their own armies, and they will have the chance to build their internal mechanisms of defense, which has been lacking. when the US has been so strategically involved in the Middle East.
When the US withdraws, what do you think the Middle East might look like 5 years from now?
Honestly, I think it would be a lot more peaceful than it is now, and it has been, due to the fact that I feel like the US involvement in the Middle East has always caused tensions. For that reason, I believe that there will always be issues in the Middle East due to the fact that there's oil in the region, and I don't think America will ever leave Middle East alone, so yeah.
It's very difficult to speculate, but I think it will go for a better.
I think it will probably be a complete disaster if the USA remain to be there, and I think the conflict will become the same it did with Iraq, Libya, Syria. I think this will be the next point of disaster.
Again, if the US withdraws, how do you think the situation might develop in occupied Palestine?
I honestly think the situation will improve. It just gives Palestine a lot more power to defend itself and to just achieve peace, possibly, but I don't think so because I feel like Israel is really powerful on its own anyway. I don't feel like it needs the US.
I think America will maintain an increased military presence on the ground and ultimately continue their quite positive relationship with Israel.
Well, Palestine is running short of friends ever since the embassy was changed and the world accepted it. I think the situation in Palestine, regardless of the US withdrawal, seems hopeless as far as the world is concerned.
Well, not many supporters for the US presence in the Middle East there amongst the public in London. You, sir, do you first of all accept our premise that the US will withdraw in the next 5 years from the Middle East? And if so, what would it look like from your point of view?
I don't think that the US is going to withdraw from the Middle East within the 5 years. I think it's a very hopeful thinking, and we hope they're going to withdraw. But the problem is, during the last 17 years, the presence of the U.S. has become very, very strong, and they have built the infrastructure for being there for a long time. And if we take that as an example, Iraq, we talk about Iraq. Even the uprising that's happening nowadays, it is mostly against the American as well as the government that's of Iraq because of its corruption, its oppression of the people of Iraq, and the same thing in most of the Arabic country. Bremer, when he came to to Iraq, invading Iraq with the American, the first thing that he did, to make sure that they're gonna be there forever, is to dismiss the Iraqi army. And that was one of the components that built Iraq. The American came to Iraq to destroy a system that exists in place at the time. We are not talking about the dictatorship or whatever it is. We're talking about the system that was in place. One of the things, as an example, the NHS used to be in Iraq the best all over the world, better than even in UK. What we have in Iraq nowadays, the basics are not there. There is shortage of food, shortage of oil, shortage of everything, yet it's the richest country in the world. The American has got to their objective. They have got a government that's that's very, very weak, and through this government they are withdrawing all the petrol of Iraq without having any benefit to the Iraqis. If we go to Yemen, for example, and we talk about the USA are losing down there. I don't think they are losing because of the fact Iraq, Yemen are divided and they are conquering the whole region. They have create a militant in the north as well as the one in the south. Yes, Iran support the militant in the north. The one in the south was created by the allies of the United States, which is UEA. And that is the reason for it, to divide the country into small pieces, to fragment the country, and to take its wealth. If we take other examples in the region, it's all going to the same conclusion. What's happening in here, if we go to Israel, or what you call Israel, which is the occupation of Palestine, what has been happening throughout the Middle East has been helping this occupation, because now the Yemenis, for example, they fight among themselves. The Iraqis fight among themselves. The Syrians fight among themselves. So who is now concentrating on the big issue that's concern all the Muslims, which is the occupation of Palestine? There is no more issue, there is no more focus in it. So the American, we think that they are going to be withdrawn, or that the public is going to go against them. I don't think that's it's going to happen. Unfortunately, we are all sad to say that they're going to go. Changing the regime administration in the United States, administration from one president to another, it's no make difference. They have a policy in place to occupy these areas directly or indirectly, to take all the wealth out of those. They came to Iraq under the quote-unquote to establish democratic system. Where are Iraq now? Iraq now in the brink of bankruptcy. Iraq now, there's no comparison, okay, during Iraq 17 years ago, not 20 years ago and now. If we remember Iraq at that time, they were, before 17 years ago, they were living in what's called oil for food. Yet every Iraqi used to get his share of food, foil, whatever is needed. Nowadays, most of the Iraqis go to the street now against the government, and because Iraq now has been occupied by the United States and Iran as well. What we have in here in Iraq and many of the countries now, there is this kind of religious type of division. Shiism against Sunnis and so on and so forth, and the beneficiary are those outside those countries. So I don't think that we're gonna see Iraq, USA withdraw from the region within the 5 years. And if they do, their agents and their puppet and their intelligence will be down there surfing them. The oil is gonna just keep pouring to many different countries, enter the name of this country, but the beneficiary is the United States.
Thank you. Gentleman next to you.
Hi George, I'm Kristian. I'm a Marxist and trade unionist from the Midlands. Right, basically, I share what I agree with what you saying. I do believe that within the next 5 to 10 years, the Americans will be gone. Now, my question to you is: do you think if the Americans leave, do you think that makes Pan-Arabism back on the cards? Do you remember the United Arab Republic in the 60s and 70s, wasn't it? Yes. Do you think that there's a possibility that there could be a resurgence of Pan-Arabism, perhaps even Baathism, and you could possibly have some kind of union between Lebanon, Syria, Iran, even though it's not Arabic, it's Persian? And if so, wouldn't it be of great strategic impact if they then allowed Palestine to join such an organisation?
Well, it's my dream, of course, as regular viewers know, that union amongst the Arabs will occur. I suspect not formally, not organically, but more and more in practice. De facto, if not de jure. And indeed, you mentioned Baathism. The Baathists couldn't even unite themselves, never mind unite the Arabs. The Baathists ruled both Syria and Iraq, but fought each other rather than uniting their countries. Imagine if Syria and Iraq had united from the moment that the Baath were in power in both countries. How different the world would look now. A united Arab Republic of 2 Baathist-ruled countries. How different that would have been. I don't think that kind of union will happen again. But unlike the European Union, it is perfectly possible for an increasingly obvious to look at union of Arab countries can occur. There is already a military political union from Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and including the Persian power of Iran. That is already an existing, that's what all the trouble is about, an existing bloc. And there's no reason why that bloc cannot increasingly act economically in terms of the development. But the idea of Arab nationalism, of Nasser's dream, will never die, in my opinion. Who else would like to talk? The gentleman behind you.
Just on the issue of Pan-Arabism, I think that obviously I am, like you, George, in favour of it. I do, in the sense of, they're united by a common language, common, not a homogenous culture. It's a very varied culture, but there's a lot of strands along that culture that unify them. And this is not to advocate US occupation of Arab lands any more than it's to advocate Israeli occupation of Palestine. But the irony is, in Iraq, what is unifying Iraqi Arabs is the US occupation. Now, I do hope that they will see that it's not just a common enemy that unites them, be it Israel or the US occupying US forces, but I am worried that once US forces leave, as they did before, and I think they should have never been there in the first place. I can't possibly advocate for their prolonged, remaining there. But I'm worried that those sectarian tensions in Iraq are again going to come to light. Hopefully they won't. Hopefully Iraqis and Syrians and Arabs across the Middle East, North Africa region will see past any sectarian differences. But I am worried that. I just hope that we're not. I hope we're not too cynical enough to believe that. I hope they're not too cynical to believe that it's only a common enemy that unifies them, and as opposed to a common language and a common cultural strand.
Very good point. Powerful. Let's take the gentleman next to you, an Arabic speaker.
اسمي سليم، مهتم شأن العراقي ومن العراق. الحقيقة أول سؤال أحب أن أسأله أنه على ماذا اعتمدت أنه 5 سنوات the 5 years not 4 years or 3 years على ماذا اعتمدت؟ السؤال الأول. السؤال الثاني أنه المشكلة هي مو مشكلة أمريكا أو الصين أو بريطانيا، المشكلة هي بنية داخلية داخل المجتمع العربي ومن ضمنها العراق. الآن العراق كل يستقوى بالخارج، الكراد يختلفون رؤاهم عن العرب، وأبسط مثال موجود حاليا المظاهرات اللي طلعت في العراق ما شارك بها الأكراد ولا شاركوا بهم السنة، بس الشيعة، مع العلم أنه الشعار اللي انطلق أنه نريد وطن. فسؤالي هو أن اللي يحصل هو مشكلة داخل البنية حتى وإن انسحبت أمريكا، وما يحتاج أنه تعليم جيد، صحة جيدة، وناس ثقات غير سارقين للمال العام يحاولون أن يكونون في السلطة حتى تكون هذه الأمور طبيعية. شكرا جزيلا.
Well, my most popular clip from Kalima Horra is when I answered a young woman in Beirut this very same question. It's not the Americans that are keeping you divided. It's not the British or the Turks or the Israelis. The problem is you. The problem is within. The problem is, as this young Englishman just said, will the Arabs fight each other over which way they hold their hands when they pray? Will the Arabs fight and die for a flag that a European gave them and a line that a European drew in the sand? This is what the Americans used to call the $64,000 question, when 64,000 was a lot of dollars, a lot more than it is now anyway. And of course, the question you pose is the big one. That's not going to be resolved in 5 years. But unless the Arabs find the answer to this question, they will forever be divided and weak and robbed and dying and dead. You know, I once went to China with President Arafat. He asked me, do you want to come to China with me? I had never been to China. My eyes lit up. I flew all the way to China. I spent the entire time in the airport in a meeting and then flew back to the Middle East. I never saw China on that occasion. But the Chinese asked him, if the Arabs were serious about recovering Palestine, they could all walk in. There's not enough bullets to stop them. And the Chinese conclusion was that they are not serious. And when I saw this little Kais lifted from the well, dead, age 7, thrown there by illegal Israeli settlers, the first question I asked myself, will this picture, this video, reach the hearts of the Arabs? Will any king or any president cry as I am crying over this child? And of course, the answer to the latter question is, of course, no. They wouldn't cry for their own child or their own parent. But the Arab mass, I believe, will cry openly or privately over this picture. Cry not just at the fate of this little boy, who's in a better place now, but cry at their own impotence, their own weakness and helplessness and hopelessness. 350, nearly 400 million Arabs from Morocco all the way to Bahrain. What a power this could be. It could be an economic, military, cultural, political superpower. Nobody would be able to do anything in the world without the agreement of such a power. If only they could unite. Doctor.
I just want to make 2 points. Number one, like Pan-Slavism, Pan-Arabism is a wonderful concept, but it doesn't exist in practice. Secondly, I want to comment on this misguided optimism about Bernie Sanders. The last time I supported a candidate in an American presidential election was when I was 10 years old in 1988, when I supported Michael Dukakis. Since then, I've learnt a lot about America. In essence, it doesn't matter who is in the White House. All that matters is that the system is entrenched in power in America, and thereby the American establishment, the American elite, is entrenched in power. If you want change in America, you have to change the system, and there is no evidence whatsoever that that will ever occur in America. My second point about Bernie Sanders, the same man who supported the brutal, savage bombing of Serbia, which involved dropping uranium on Serbian civilians, and the same Bernie Sanders that supported the so-called Kosovo Liberation Army, one of the most brutal terrorist organizations that the world has known, and one of the most brutal and one of the most powerful organized crime syndicates. I said in 2016, if Trump was to become president, there would be no change in American foreign policy. If Bernie Sanders was to become president, there'd be no change in American foreign policy. The system is entrenched in power. As soon as someone enters the White House, then the machines of the American government come round them and dictate to them. So let's not be misguided about Bernie Sanders.
Well, that's true up to now, up to a point. Actually, Trump has tried to change American foreign policy, and that's why he's in the desperate trouble that he's in. He's in the trouble with the American deep state precisely because he did not want to follow Hillary Clinton's foreign policy. He did not want to have a full-scale war in Syria. He does not want to have a war with Iran. He doesn't actually want to be involved in wars. He wants to make money. He wants to party. He seems a party-going kind of guy to me. Carol.
Yeah, people change. I hear what you're saying about Bernie, but Abdel Bari Atwan was on Dateline London just near Election Day in 2016, and he said the Arab world, the Muslim world adores Bernie Sanders. And we know that Bernie has been absolutely, phenomenally vociferous about the situation with Israel and
He opposed the Vietnam War, he opposed the Iraq War, he's against the war in Syria, he's against any possibility of war with Iran, just to balance
yeah,
Dr.
and
Marcus's
also, you
points.
said right at the beginning, back in 1975, you couldn't fill this room with people who supported the Palestinian cause. Now you would need to...
You need Hyde Park.
Yeah, exactly. I understand what's going on there. I am American, and I'm very involved. I am a journalist, but I am involved. The Jewish community in the U.S. has shifted now. They are not 100% gung-ho behind Israel. Contributions have dropped, but also the American electorate is tired of seeing things like what you've described, the boy in the well. The Bernie Sanders, I think, I may be wrong, but I think he would galvanize a change in American policy where Israel and the Palestinians are concerned. And I don't think he would really care about the way the American system is run. I think it would be an earthquake, but I think he could get somewhere. And I think European nations would be behind him. Justin Trudeau would get behind him. There would be leaders in the world who would get behind what he wants to do. Also, it's to do with money. Bernie has argued for years the amount of money America's spending on troops in that part of the world, on military gear, has to be diverted to put Americans in a place where we are here, where we have an NHS. Please God, it should continue.
Right, so.
But they need money so that 57 million Americans can get medical care.
Right, so, sir.
I think we are talking a lot about the USA, with regard to Palestine, to the Middle East and stuff like that. And I don't think that's the way the problem is going to be solved. What's happening in Palestine at the time being, which the American has successfully done, they split the Palestinian. They have created what's called the authority, the Palestinian Authority, and installed it inside to become a kind of a burden on the Palestinians themselves. But the split among the Palestinians nowadays, it's worse than what used to be between the Palestinian and the occupier. Now the occupier are very relaxed because they fight, Hamas are fighting Fatah and the other way around. And the other thing is for the Arabs to keep wishing that this guy is going to come and he's going to be good. The Arabs were very optimistic that Obama has come after George Bush. George Bush was a very bad guy and so on and so forth. Obama is going to be a peaceful man and they gave him a Nobel Prize and so on. What he done? He done worse than George Bush because he can't change it. As my colleague in here just say, it is in the system. There is a system that has been built since Henry Kissinger brought the region into perspective, that this area is going to be occupied. We need the oil. We need to divide and conquer. If we have to go by force, we're going to do it again. After Vietnam, the Americans dared to go anywhere else. Then they went into Iraq because they find that Iraq was not an easy country to change the regime. With the other one, they did it by what's called the demonstration and so on and so forth, embedded their agents inside. And what we have nowadays, we have disaster everywhere in the Middle East. Iraq, as an example, it used to be the best in the region, regardless about the dictator, okay? All dictatorship. The Gulf states are dictators, the Far East, the Middle East, most of them are dictators. But at least there was a system. The other thing is that we have to think about if we are talking about the Middle East, there are others that are helping the United States by either they know about it or they don't know, like Iran, for example, and now they're fighting those countries, okay, and they are talking about this type of mentality that we are raising Shiism. We are not about it. Come and invest, do development in this country, talk about equal opportunity, equal human rights. But you don't have that. The problem in that region that we have now, Iran has divided us the same thing as the United States. And they don't know. When the United States was in good agreement with the Iranian, they let them run Iraq. There's no problem. When the Iraqi government started attacking the American embassy, they killed Salmani. And what's bothering most of the Arabs is the Iraqi parliament to meet and say for the American, get out because Salmani was dead. Why don't they hold a meeting 17 years ago and tell the American out?
Because they weren't strong enough then, but now they are strong enough.
We don't need an Iranian to come and rule Iraq. Okay?
Look,
We are talking about
Now
it here. We need the Iraqi...
You're blaming Iran.
No, just a minute.
Before you blame the British, the Americans, the Iranians did nothing. The only people supporting the Palestinians who are bleeding under occupation is Iran.
You see,
not one single Arab country.
George,
not a single Sunni power.
No, there is two different issues in here. What we're talking about Iraq is different from Palestine. What's happening in Iraq, we have a corrupt government supported by Iran, because they were living in Iran, until the American came and took them by tank inside Baghdad.
Did you support the overthrow of Saddam Hussein?
I didn't. I don't support any force from the outside. Okay, any force from the outside, I don't support it. Okay,
because you got to be careful what you wish for.
Okay,
you know,
who threw Saddam Hussein is the existing government by the head of the American, and now they are turning their back against the American because they harm an Iranian agent in Iraq. They should, if they have any dignity, they should have stand against the American from day one and say, get out. We don't need an occupation. You had destroyed our country. But to do it now, it just say that they are puppet to the Iranian, and we don't need any Arabs to be to Iran or anybody.
Than never. Nice to disagree with you as always. It's been a great show. I think you'll agree. We'll see who's right, who's wrong. Not just in 5 years, maybe even a good deal shorter than that. Maybe 5 months.